This poor girl reveals the location of a millionaire's missing son, but behind it all was something much worse that no one knew. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The frigid winter morning in New York City brought with it the worst nightmare a father could experience. Raphael, 30, walked through Central Park for the 100th time that week, his bloodshot eyes scanning every bush, every bench, every corner where a 4-year-old child might be hiding. 3 days ago, his son Lucas had simply vanished while playing near the pond, and since then Raphael's world had completely crumbled. The businessman who until then managed a considerable fortune through investments in Wall Street stocks now found himself in a reality where all his money seemed useless. He had hired private detectives, offered rewards totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, but nothing worked. The NYPD had already searched the entire area without finding any clues, and with each passing hour, hope grew fainter. It was then that a tiny figure approached him, shivering with cold. A beggar girl who looked to be only 2 years old, but whom he would later discover was 4, stood a few feet away. Her disheveled hair and dirty clothes contrasted with the large, penetrating eyes that seemed to carry a wisdom impossible for her age. "He's in the pond," whispered the girl, pointing to the dark waters of the park. Raphael felt his heart race. He had checked the pond countless times, but something in the certainty of that childish voice made him believe that perhaps he had missed something. He ran to the park's administration and, using his influence and wealth, managed to get a professional diver to descend into the icy waters that morning. What they found left everyone perplexed. It wasn't Lucas, but a children's backpack stuck in submerged branches. Inside, protected by plastic, was a note written in irregular handwriting: "Stop looking where you shouldn't." The discovery sent waves of terror and confusion throughout the search team. Raphael held the note with trembling hands, trying to understand what it meant. The girl, who everyone discovered was named Sophia, continued to point to the pond with a disturbing insistence. "He's down there," she repeated, "just not how they think." Sophia's words echoed in Raphael's mind like an impossible riddle to decipher. How could such a small child who lived on the streets know anything about his son's disappearance? And why did her words seem to carry a weight of truth that he couldn't ignore? That afternoon, while Raphael was trying to process the discovery of the backpack, Marina, his ex-wife, appeared in the park in a state of absolute fury. She had hired her own detectives, who discovered something that Raphael had kept secret: gambling debts amounting to millions, compromising a large part of his net worth. "You're gambling with our son's life!" Marina shouted, her words cutting through the cold air like blades. "How could you have hidden this from me? All this money lost while Lucas—" The argument attracted curious glances from other park visitors, but Raphael could barely concentrate on the accusations. His mind was torn between guilt for the secret debts and the image of that little girl who seemed to know more than she should about Lucas's whereabouts. Sophia watched everything from afar, accompanied by a frail-looking woman whom Raphael assumed was her mother. The child didn't take her eyes off the pond, as if she were seeing something that others couldn't perceive. From time to time she would murmur strange phrases like, "He plays with the fish," and "The water holds secrets," making Raphael question whether the girl had mental problems or if she really knew something important. Night fell over New York City, but Raphael remained in the park until the security guards forced him to leave. Upon arriving at his luxurious apartment, he found a pile of papers on the table. Documents from his company showing that it was being investigated for embezzlement. Everything he had built over the years, all his investments and holdings, seemed to be collapsing simultaneously. Sitting in his empty living room, Raphael realized that losing Lucas was just the beginning of a downfall that could destroy everything that was left of his life. But the image of Sophia pointing to the pond remained etched in his mind, along with the inexplicable certainty that she was the key to finding his son. Outside, the city continued its nightly routine, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the life of a desperate father who had just discovered that his fortune might not be enough to bring back the only thing that really mattered. The following days turned into a routine of despair for Raphael. Every morning he arrived at the park before the sun even rose, and there he found Sophia sitting on the same bench, watching the pond with an intensity that chilled any adult. The girl seemed never to leave, as if she were guarding something that only she could see. Carmem, Sophia's mother, 28, tried to pull her daughter away from the park, but the child resisted with surprising strength for her size. She wasn't like this before, Carmem confessed to Raphael on a particularly cold morning. Since your son disappeared, she's been obsessed with this place. She barely sleeps, barely eats. Life on the streets had destroyed Carmem physically. Her constant cough and extreme pallor revealed a health weakened by 2 years of exposure to cold and poor nutrition. She had lost her job when Sophia was little, and without family to help, they ended up living off handouts and the occasional kindness of strangers. Raphael watched the interaction between mother and daughter with a heavy heart. Sophia continued to draw in the dirt with twigs, always the same shapes, birds flying over waves of water, as if she were trying to communicate something through those primitive images. "He wants to come back, but he can't," Sophia murmured during one of Raphael's visits, without raising her eyes from her drawings. "The door is locked from the inside." The girl's words sent a chill down Raphael's spine. How could a 4-year-old child talk about locked doors, and from inside of what? He tried to ask more questions, but Sophia just shook her head and went back to drawing. Meanwhile, Raphael's financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. His partners discovered the gambling debts and demanded an emergency meeting. The company he had built with so much care, where he kept most of his capital in safe investments, was threatened with dissolution. Important contracts began to be cancelled, and loyal employees resigned, fearing for the stability of the company. Marina appeared again in the park, this time accompanied by a man Raphael didn't know. Carlos was tall, well-dressed, and there was something in his smile that bothered Raphael deeply. "This is Carlos," Marina said with a defiant tone in her voice. "My boyfriend. He works in the financial sector and has been helping me better understand our situation." The revelation hit Raphael like a punch in the stomach. Not only had Marina moved on, but her new boyfriend had knowledge about finance, knowledge that could explain how information about his debts had leaked so quickly. Carlos greeted Raphael with an excessive firmness in his handshake. "I'm very sorry about the situation with Lucas," he said, but his eyes showed more curiosity than genuine compassion. "Marina told me about the financial problems too. It must be very difficult to deal with all this at the same time." Raphael felt that there was something wrong with that conversation, but he couldn't identify exactly what. Carlos asked subtle questions about the company, about the investments, about the strategies Raphael had used to accumulate his fortune. They were questions that might seem like concern from a future brother-in-law, but that sounded more like a disguised interrogation. That afternoon, a social worker named Helena, 45, appeared in the park. She'd been alerted to Sophia and Carmem's situation and wanted to assess whether the child was in adequate care. Helena was an experienced professional, with 2 decades working with families in vulnerable situations. She observed Sophia for a few minutes before approaching, immediately noticing the girl's atypical behavior. "Sophia, can I see your drawings?" Helena asked, crouching down beside the child. Sophia looked at her suspiciously, but after a few minutes showed her the drawings she had made in the dirt. Helena studied the shapes with growing attention. There were patterns there, always the same sequence of images that repeated: birds flying, water, a rectangular shape that could be a house or a box, and a larger figure next to a smaller one. "Can you tell me about this drawing here?" Helena asked, pointing to the rectangular shape. "That's where he is," Sophia replied simply. "Under the ground, near the water." Helena felt a chill. During her years of experience, she had learned that traumatized children often express their fears and memories through drawings. But there was something in Sophia's drawings that seemed more than just trauma. It seemed like specific knowledge. Raphael, who was listening to the conversation, approached. "Do you think she really knows something?" he asked Helena. "Children see things that adults ignore," Helena replied carefully, "and Sophia shows signs of having witnessed something significant. I need to talk to her more, but properly." That night, Raphael received a call that left him even more disturbed. It was 3 in the morning when the phone rang, and on the other end of the line there was only the sound of heavy breathing. No one spoke, but the call lasted almost 2 minutes before being abruptly terminated. The next day, the same thing happened, and the day after that too. Always at 3 in the morning, always the same heavy breathing, always the same tense silence. Raphael began to wonder if the calls had any connection to Lucas's disappearance. Was someone trying to intimidate him? Or worse, was it someone who knew where his son was? Sophia continued to appear in the park every day, always at the same time, always with the same drawings. But now, Raphael began to notice other disturbing details. The girl seemed to know exactly when he would arrive, as if she were waiting for him. And her strange phrases were getting more specific. "The man in the cap was here yesterday," she said one morning, without anyone having mentioned any man. "He keeps looking at the pond and then leaves, but he always comes back." Raphael looked around the park, but didn't see anyone suspicious. "What man, Sophia? What does he look like?" But the girl had already turned her attention back to the drawings, as if the conversation had never happened. It was always like that. She would release disturbing information and then close herself off again in her silent world. The feeling that he was being watched began to haunt Raphael constantly. In the park, at home, at the company, there was always the impression of invisible eyes following his every move. And the nightly calls continued, punctual as a clock, fueling a growing paranoia that threatened to consume what little sanity he had left. 2 weeks after Lucas's disappearance, Helena convinced Raphael to hire a renowned child psychologist to analyze Sophia. Dr. Isabel, 50, had worked with complex cases of child trauma and had a solid reputation in New York City for being able to communicate with children that other professionals considered impossible to treat. Raphael invested part of the resources that were still left from his holdings to pay the specialist's fees. Each consultation cost a significant amount, but he was willing to spend whatever it took if it could lead to Lucas. The first session took place in a specially prepared room, with toys, paper and crayons scattered around the room. Sophia entered accompanied by Carmem, who by this time already showed worrying signs of health deterioration. The cough had worsened, and she needed to stop constantly to catch her breath. "Sophia, you can draw whatever you want here," said Dr. Isabel in a soft voice, watching the girl's every move. Sophia picked up the pencils and began to draw with a precision that surprised the psychologist. Instead of the typical scribbles of a 4-year-old child, she created defined geometric shapes, always repeating the same elements: a rectangular structure under the ground, an adult figure holding a smaller figure, and always the waves representing water. But there was something new in the drawings this time. Sophia added a specific symbol, a triangle with a circle inside, which she drew several times around the other figures. "What does this symbol mean, Sophia?" asked Dr. Isabel, pointing to the triangle. "It's the bad man's mark," Sophia replied without hesitation. "He has it on his shirt, and on the car too." The psychologist exchanged a meaningful look with Helena, who was attending the session. That level of specific detail suggested that Sophia had really witnessed something concrete, not just created fantasies. During the session, Sophia also began to talk about nightmares. "The bad man takes children under the ground," she said, coloring with excessive force. "He promised they were going to play, but they're sad down there, and they can't get out." Sophia's words made Helena remember something she had seen in the social department's files. She asked for a break in the session and called colleagues from other regions, asking a specific question. Were there other cases of missing children near parks with ponds? The answer she received chilled her to the bone. In the last 2 years, 3 other children had disappeared in similar circumstances, always in parks with bodies of water, always without a trace. The cases had been closed for lack of evidence, but now Helena was beginning to see a disturbing pattern. Meanwhile, Raphael discovered that his financial problems were much worse than he imagined. Carlos, Marina's boyfriend, had gained access to confidential information about the company and was using that data to pressure clients to cancel contracts. It was a meticulous sabotage aimed at completely destroying the wealth that Raphael had built. The revelation came through an old client who called Raphael personally. "I received a call from someone saying that your company was going bankrupt and that I should cancel our contract immediately," the man explained. "I didn't want to believe it, but the person knew very specific details about our business." Raphael felt the anger growing in his chest. Carlos wasn't just taking advantage of Marina, he was actively trying to destroy his life. But why? What reason would a stranger have for such wickedness? That afternoon, Raphael decided to investigate on his own. He hired a private detective to follow Carlos and find out more about his past. What he discovered in the first few hours was enough to confirm his suspicions. Carlos didn't work in the financial sector, as he had told Marina. In fact, he had been fired from his last job for fraud and was living off scamming vulnerable women. While Raphael was dealing with this discovery, Sophia had an episode that alarmed everyone. During one of the visits to the park, she began to scream and point to a specific area near the pond, repeating, "He's trying to get out! He's trying to get out!" Carmen tried to calm her daughter, but Sophia was in a state of total panic. She ran to the edge of the pond and began digging with her hands in the damp earth, as if she were trying to open a hole. Helena arrived quickly after being called and managed to calm Sophia, but the episode left everyone deeply disturbed. The girl had shown genuine despair, as if she really believed that someone was trapped underground. It was then that Helena remembered the symbol that Sophia had drawn. She decided to research what that triangle with a circle could mean, and discovered something that made her call Raphael immediately. "I found something about the symbol," she said over the phone. "It's the logo of an old construction company that went bankrupt a few years ago. The company was called Triangle Construction and specialized in underground works, tunnels, drainage systems, shelters." Raphael felt his heart race. "And where is this company located?" "Here's the problem," Helena continued. "The owner of the company, Roberto, 55, had a disturbing history. There are records of complaints involving inappropriate behavior with children, but he was never convicted due to lack of evidence." The information opened up a new line of investigation that Raphael hadn't considered before. If Sophia had really seen a man with the symbol of this company, perhaps there was a connection between Lucas's disappearance and the old underground constructions in the area. That night, the anonymous calls started again, but this time there was something different. Instead of the usual heavy breathing, Raphael heard a background noise that he recognized, the sound of dripping water, as if the call was being made from a damp, enclosed place. "Hello," Raphael tried, breaking the silence for the first time. The line was cut immediately, but the feeling that remained was terrible. Someone was trying to communicate something through these calls, and that someone was in a place that perfectly matched Sophia's descriptions of underground spaces near the water. Sophia continued to deteriorate emotionally. Carmen reported that the girl had started having terrible nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night screaming about children trapped under the ground and bad men who make false promises. The situation became even more desperate when Carmen fainted in the park due to pneumonia that had been developing. She was hospitalized in serious condition, leaving Sofia temporarily in Helena's care while Raphael tried to process all the contradictory information that was emerging. With Carmen hospitalized and Sofia increasingly traumatized, Raphael found himself facing not only Lucas's disappearance, but also the responsibility for a girl who seemed to hold the keys to solving the mystery, but whose words were enigmas that he still couldn't decipher completely. The pressure was intensifying from all directions, and Raphael began to realize that he might be dealing with something much bigger and more dangerous than he had initially imagined. The investigation into Roberto led Raphael to an unexpected discovery. The man was in a rehab clinic on the day of Lucas's disappearance, which eliminated any possibility of direct involvement. But Helena discovered something even more disturbing. Roberto had a son, Pedro, 35, who had inherited his father's obsession with underground constructions and had a history of serious mental problems. Pedro frequented the park regularly, especially at night, and had a particular fixation on children. Several parents had already reported strange behaviors from him, but there was never enough evidence for concrete legal action. Meanwhile, Marina had a total breakdown when she discovered that Carlos had disappeared with all the money from their joint account. She had transferred her savings to an account that she thought was shared, but that was actually only in his name. When she tried to access the funds to pay lawyers to continue looking for Lucas, she discovered that she was completely without resources. "He took everything," Marina cried on the phone to Raphael. "I trusted him. I thought he was trying to help me, but he was planning this from the beginning." Raphael felt a mixture of anger and pity. Despite all the problems between them, Marina didn't deserve to be deceived in that way. He used part of the resources that were still left from his investments to help her with basic expenses, even knowing that his own financial situation was becoming increasingly precarious. Sofia, under Helena's temporary care, began to show worrying physical signs. She had lost weight drastically and showed symptoms of severe malnutrition. Doctors discovered that she had a rare condition that affected her visual perception, causing her to process information differently from other children. This may explain why she can notice details that others don't see, the doctor explained to Raphael and Helena. Children with this condition often have an increased ability to perceive patterns and peripheral movements. The revelation brought a new perspective on Sofia's visions. Perhaps she really had seen things that others had missed, not because of supernatural powers, but because of a neurological difference that made her more observant. During one of the visits to the hospital where Carmen was hospitalized, Sofia had another revealing episode. She was looking out the window when she pointed to a building under construction across the street. "There," she said simply. "The man just like the other man is there." Raphael followed her gaze and saw two men working on the construction. One of them was wearing a cap and had the symbol of Roberto's old company tattooed on his arm. But what was most striking was that there were two practically identical men working together. Helena made a few calls and discovered information that completely changed the course of the investigation. Roberto had two sons, not just Pedro. There was also André, who had been given up for adoption as a baby and grew up in a wealthy family in the same city. André had recently discovered about his biological family and was trying to reconnect with his brother. "André works legitimately in the construction sector," Helena explained. "But Pedro has serious problems, and apparently the two met a few months ago." The plot thickened even more when Raphael received something that changed everything. A video on his cell phone showing Lucas alive, playing in a room he didn't recognize. The boy looked healthy, but thin, and was surrounded by new toys. The sender of the video was impossible to track. Raphael watched the video dozens of times, analyzing every detail. Lucas was alive. But where? And who had sent those images? Hope and despair mixed in his chest in an almost unbearable way. Sophia, upon seeing the video, made an observation that no one had noticed. The wall behind him has the same water noise that I hear in my dreams. Raphael paid closer attention and realized that there was indeed a dripping sound in the background audio. Sophia had identified a detail that had escaped everyone else. Deeper investigations revealed that Andre had rented a house on the outskirts of the city a few weeks ago. When Helena and Raphael went to check the address, they found the property apparently abandoned, but with clear signs of recent occupation. It was Sophia who led them to the final truth. During one of her crises, she drew a rudimentary map that showed the way from the abandoned house to a second structure hidden in the back of the property. "He's here," she said, pointing to the drawing. "The man who cries a lot doesn't let the bad man take him away." Raphael and Helena followed Sophia's directions and found a disguised entrance that led to a sophisticated underground construction. It was a work of Roberto's old company, a shelter that had been abandoned but kept in habitable condition. Inside the shelter, they found Lucas alive and Andre taking care of him. The man was visibly tormented, torn between his conscience and loyalty to his brother. Lucas, upon seeing Raphael, ran into his arms crying, "Daddy, I knew you would find me." The truth that emerged was complex and painful. Marcelo, who Raphael discovered was Lucas's biological father, had been released from prison and contacted Andre to help him recover his son. Pedro had facilitated the kidnapping, but Andre, upon realizing Marcelo's real intentions, which were to sell Lucas for illegal international adoption, decided to protect the child. "I couldn't hand him over to the authorities because I would be arrested as an accomplice," confessed Andre, tears in his eyes. "But I also couldn't let Marcelo take him out of the country. So I kept Lucas here, safe, waiting for an opportunity to resolve this without destroying more lives." Sophia had seen Andre several times taking food to the shelter during his nightly walks through the park. Her subconscious had processed all this fragmented information, creating the visions that seemed supernatural but were actually real observations processed differently due to her neurological condition. Marcelo was arrested when he tried to flee the country, Pedro was admitted for psychiatric treatment, and Andre, after making a plea deal, was sentenced to community service. Marina managed to recover financially with help from her family and entered treatment to overcome the trauma of Carlos's betrayal. But the most beautiful transformation came when Raphael, even discovering that he wasn't Lucas's biological father, decided to adopt him legally. "Being a father isn't about genes," he said to Marina. "It's about love and responsibility." With his company destroyed and his fortune drastically reduced, Raphael sold what remained of his assets and bought a modest house on the outskirts of the city. But his biggest decision was to become Sophia's legal guardian and get adequate medical treatment for Carmim. "Sophia saved my son," Raphael explained to Helena during the guardianship process. "Now it's my turn to save her." The new family, Raphael, Lucas, Sophia, and Carmim, settled into a simpler but infinitely happier life. Carmim got a job as a cook in a nearby restaurant after recovering from pneumonia. And Sophia, with proper treatment for her neurological condition, flourished in a surprising way. Lucas and Sophia became inseparable, playing together in the small garden of the new house. Sophia never had disturbing nightmares or distressing visions again. Instead, she smiled watching Lucas play, finally at peace, knowing that she had helped reunite a family that was now truly hers. Raphael learned that sometimes losing all material wealth can be the path to finding treasures much more valuable. A family united by love and gratitude, where each member had saved the others from their own forms of suffering. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier, Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.